My name is Dr. Patricia Gonzalez. I am the Assistant Dean for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in the College of Arts and Sciences. And we are excited because today during this workshop, our facilitators will give a brief overview of what neurodiversity is, share workplace examples as we think about working at CU Boulder of neurodivergent individuals, their superstrength and their kryptonite, and provide helpful resources, research, and support for staff and supervisors to improve workplace communication, productivity, and culture. Hopefully, everyone leaves today some time to reflect on what does it mean for me to take today's conversation and apply it to the current work that we're doing or that you're doing. And before we get started, I want to pass it over to Marisha, who's going to do the land acknowledgement.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marisha Lopez. I am the Program Manager for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in the College of Arts and Sciences. So before we get started with today's workshop, I wanted to lead us all through a land acknowledgement. We invite you to take a moment to reflect on your relationship to this land of Boulder and relationship to local Indigenous communities as we are guided by the university's land acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous peoples in our state and in stewardship to land before the establishment of the state into this present moment. CU Boulder humbly acknowledges that it is located on the traditional and current homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native nations and communities. The violent forced removal of Native people from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. These histories have brought us to the present moment, wherein the University of Colorado Boulder is determined to commit to improving and enhancing relationships with Indigenous communities and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty, educating, conducting research, and supporting student success and integrating Indigenous knowledge. And lastly, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with Native communities to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support. I am now going to turn over to introducing you all to our workshop facilitators. Eileen Brown, originally from outside of Chicago, Illinois, Eileen graduated from CU in 2005, double majoring in sociology and religious studies. After living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for 11 years, she moved to Berthoud, Colorado with her husband and 2 daughters. Since 2018, Eileen has worked at CU Boulder, but has been in her current role as the International Affairs Program Coordinator since January 2022. Beyond her professional role, Eileen has been enthusiastically learning about and advocating for neurodiversity awareness after being diagnosed with ADHD in 2020. Stefani Harrison. Stefani is an international traveler with over 8 years of experience in the nonprofit world, focusing on creative problem solving, customer relations, and database management, who has helped drive organizational success for companies in Colorado, Florida, and the Philippines. She has a Master of Science in Entrepreneurship and a Bachelor of Science in Entomology from the University of Florida. She is also a Salesforce certified administrator, using the platform for over 4 years to enhance data-driven decision-making. Stefani is passionate about creative ideas and using data to drive change and help others. Her passion for bringing together unique minds to drive creative and unique ideas has led her to found the CU Boulder Affinity Group Alliance for Neurodiversity with group lead Eileen Brown and 5 other members. So I hope you all will join me now in welcoming Stefani and Eileen. Feel free to show some love in the chat or use emojis. Welcome, Stefani and Eileen.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having us. So just to be clear, I'm Stefani and
I'm Eileen.
And we're so thrilled to see so many people here to learn about neurodiversity in the workplace. So to help us get started, we've created this wonderful roadmap. So we're going to go over what is neurodiversity, misconceptions, superstrengths and kryptonites, tools and takeaways, and then CU workplace resources, question and answer, as well as links and resources that you guys can use going forward. All right, so what is neurodiversity? Neurodiversity is defined as a framework that acknowledges the intrinsic variety of the human brain function and cognition. And so oftentimes that's a little confusing for most people. Something that I find incredibly helpful is talking about the origin of the word. So neurodiversity comes from the term biodiversity, in which you need a variety of different species and resources and things to help an environment thrive. And that was the inspiration for neurodiversity, helping humans thrive through a variety of different mindsets and ways of thinking. So it is estimated that 15 to 20% of the world population shows some form of neurodivergence. That makes it the largest disability group in the world, and it is also one of the largest minority groups in the world, as you can be of any race, gender, sexuality, and still be identified as a neurodivergent. This slide shows some of the most commonly known neurodiversities. So autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, dyslexia, difficulty with letters, dysgraphia, difficulty with handwriting, dyspraxia, difficulty with motor skills, dyscalculia, difficulty with numbers, and dysnomia, difficulty recalling words from memory. We also have Tourette syndrome, which you've probably seen depicted most commonly in movies and TV shows, as that is when people have nervous tics and movements and sounds that are often viewed as destructive. We also have sensory processing disorders, a variety of psychiatric and mental health disorders. And then there's also things like acquired neurodiversity as change in environment, head trauma, different things in that regard. Now, this is just a very small group of the most common neurodiversities. There are also a whole bunch of different kinds, and some people who identify as neurodivergent, but can't necessarily pinpoint an exact definition or an exact thing on this list to help.
We're going to talk about some misconceptions about neurodiversity. These are just a handful of them. There are lots of other misconceptions. So one of the misconceptions that that I hear, especially as someone with late diagnosed ADHD, is that everyone is a little ADHD. You know, when I first started thinking about it and evaluating my life, you know, it's the classic example of I have one spot in my house that I put my car keys or my phone. And if I don't, then I will have no clue where they are. And everyone, that happens to everyone. The difference is that for me, it's a daily impact on my life. And so similar with some of the other signs of like ADHD, forgetting names, not being able to remember if I've completed a task, all of these sorts of things. Those things happen to everyone, but it impacts my life on the daily. The other thing is that there is very distinct differences in brain structure, in how your neurotransmitters work. It's been connected to like dopamine transmission and all of those sorts of things, that there is a biological, like neurological difference in my brain that makes some of these things more challenging. Neurodiverse people are not empathetic is another misconception. It's kind of that classic like Sheldon from the Big Bang Theory stereotype. And what has been discovered is that neurodiverse people are actually exceptionally empathetic, but just not in the way that normally resonates with neurotypical people. So there's something called cognitive versus affective empathy. So in cognitive empathy is the inability to recognize or name emotions based on facial expressions. It's that classic like missing social cues, literal thinking, etc. And then affective empathy is like instincts and involuntary responses to the emotions of others. So some people who could get overwhelmed with emotions, it might actually cause them to be withdrawn. One thing, and kind of an extreme example of it is like the person who maybe is unable to read facial expressions from someone they are talking to, but meanwhile, if there's like something that fell on the ground and someone steps on it, an inanimate object, and someone steps on it, that person might feel extremely uncomfortable with that and think about that object being in pain, or that they would see that. So they internalize the empathy a lot more than in a neurotypical way, it would be externalized. And then double empathy is another concept that is that neurotypical people and neurodiverse people generally miss each other. So for example, in a game, there was a research study in a game of, then they did a game of telephone. And when there were mixed groups of people, when there were neurotypical people and neurodiverse people trying to play the game of telephone, passing along the lines or the words, and then the person at the beginning has the actual phrase and then see how different it is at the end of the line. When it was a mixed group of people, the accuracy was terrible. But when the groups were separated, so when it was a line of just people who were neurotypical or just people who were neurodiverse, the percentage of accuracy was negligibly different, meaning that the neurotypical people had the same accuracy as the neurodiverse people, whereas it was drastically different when it was a mixed group. And so the idea is that generally, neurodiverse people can be very empathetic and very understanding and know how to interact better with other neurodiverse people. So it's just a different way of evaluating how people are interacting. You don't look or seem neurodiverse, so it must not like actually be, it's fine. Like it must not actually be real. So that's another misconception, because a lot of neurodiverse people mask. People mask in all different sorts of environments and for all different sorts of reasons. Pretty much everyone masks in certain ways. And so what masking is hiding the traits that are part of yourself in order to fit in. So it's very, it's something that happens with lots of different people. It can happen if you're visiting family, you act differently than when you're at your own house, all of those sorts of different things. And so for example, someone who is autistic and has a challenging time of making eye contact will actually force themselves to make eye contact more regularly than they would have. There's lots of different challenges and problems with masking. It can actually cause lots of underlying issues like anxiety, or it can cause exhaustion. Since it generally helps people fit in, it means that there's often delayed diagnoses, which then has other challenges of not being able to get the help that you need early enough. There's lots of reasons why people remain undiagnosed, so you might not know. There's challenges like, especially as an adult, it costs a lot of money to get a diagnosis. Insurance often won't cover it, or you have to pay like you have to pay more to do it. There's also still stigma and challenges with having a diagnosis. Things are getting better with that, but there's still definitely stigmas that are related to having a diagnosis of something. And then also there's a difference between, there's something called high or low support needs, or it's also been referred to as high or low functioning. So as with everything, neurodiverse people fit on a spectrum. So I don't seem like I am ADHD, because especially at work, man, I am on top of things. Like I am very good at what I do. But I have very detailed systems for me doing that. And so it might not seem as though I'm ADHD. I'm not bouncing off the walls. They don't fit that stereotype of a young boy who is diagnosed, in school. And even saying that I am low support needs doesn't quite ring true, because I have all of these systems in place that help me with my ADHD and things I've learned. And so in actuality, I have a lot of things that help me. And so even kind of calling myself low support needs doesn't really fit. I would also say that masking and all of these things, there's other challenges that happen with this. So there's often comorbidities with a neurodiverse, with a diagnosis. I was trying to figure out if I had undiagnosed ADHD or anxiety, and I could have been diagnosed either way. Depression is another one that often is diagnosed with other neurodiverse diagnoses. And then the invalidation that can happen with both this one of like, you don't look like, no way, like you don't look like you don't act like you're autistic, or everyone's a little ADHD. The like invalidation that happens when people say that is really hard. I didn't know that other people didn't have some of the same struggles that I did. I didn't know that I was working this much harder in order to be successful. So it's those sorts of things that you need to just kind of also be aware of. And finally, the misconception of neurodiverse people aren't good employees. I would say I'm a very good employee. And when you consider the fact, like, remember that 15 to 20% of the world's population is neurodiverse, you're gonna have employees, you're gonna have colleagues, coworkers, family members, like, people who are neurodiverse, and you would probably not say that they aren't good people or aren't good employees. Also, there's lots of different skills. Stephanie will talk about this, but there's lots of different strengths that we offer. ADHD people often are really great at pattern recognition. People who have dyslexia are often better at abstract reasoning than people without dyslexia. So there's lots of different strengths that we offer as well.
Yeah, so going from the misconceptions to the super strengths and kryptonites is neurodiversity has become a much more popular term in that it separates from that term of disability. As I've seen some people have been mentioning in the chat, and Eileen was properly describing, from her experience, she's had to do extra in order to be viewed as keeping up. And I've had the same experience myself. So personally, I am a self-diagnosed autistic person. I discovered it during the pandemic, as many people who are now identifying as neurodivergent have, and many people have also identified due to helping their kids better identify during the stress and the different environmental change we all faced when 2020 uprooted all of our lives and made us change. So something to note for neurodiversity and disability is neurodiversity is the way that the mind works, and not everyone will identify as being disabled. As people have been talking about in the chat, just because you are differently minded doesn't mean that you're unable, unwilling to do something and not capable. And so it's been why the term neurodiversity is really popping up and it's gotten a lot more attention. So transitioning from that disability label to super strengths and kryptonites is just like every individual, neurodiverse individuals also have unique minds and unique circumstances. So something that's a wonderful strength for one individual neurodiverse person won't necessarily be a super strength for someone else, but they will have different abilities and weaknesses depending on the situation. So some of the top ones that we see for neurodiversity is creativity. Because neurodiverse minds oftentimes think differently, they come up with lots of thoughts and ideas, and they love brainstorming and coming up with different things. They love to think outside of the box. It is believed that Nikola Tesla, was actually neurodiverse and possibly autistic. And that was part of the reason why he came up with so many wonderful inventions. And it can be credited sometimes that some of the best inventions and changes within our society have come because people were thinking differently and came up with a solution to things that someone who does not identify as neurodiverse just really didn't think about. And so during this presentation, you may hear us also be talking about neurodiverse and neurotypical. As I said, everyone's minds operate differently, but those who identify as neurodiverse, ones who are autistic, have ADHD, feel their minds operate very differently than the majority of society, will more oftentimes identify as neurodiverse. And within the neurodiverse community, we refer to people who may not identify as neurodiverse as neurotypical. So compared to a neurotypical, we were talking about creativity. So that helps us think outside the box, come up with a whole bunch of new ideas and energies and different things that we're going to do. However, the kryptonite can be being in a work environment that does not encourage ideas and shoots down an idea right away. And it can make it more difficult for neurodiverse individuals to be willing and creative and come up with things when the reaction to those ideas is shutting them down. Another example is specifically with ADHD, although it does occur with other forms of neurodiversity, is hyperfixation or hyperfocus. For people with ADHD, they can get if there is a topic or a task that they are very excited for, they can launch into that task for hours on end and get a lot done and lose track of time and can really produce some of the best results that you've seen. With the issue of sometimes they have time blindness, they get so involved and can fall into that flow that they don't necessarily recognize that, oh, this much time has passed, I've done so many of these things. The kryptonite for that is most neurodiverse individuals perform better when they have interest within whatever topic it is. So if you have a unique, cool new project that a neurodiverse is into, they're all for it. However, if you're giving them a constant repetitive task that you're doing the exact same thing over and over again, it can be harder for someone who's neurodiverse to consistently be doing that all the time. Again, neurodiversity is unique for every individual. Just one person who identifies as being autistic and another person who identifies as being autistic can have totally different presentations of these. The next one is process development. So they're really good at creating different systems and ways of being that work for their mind. It helps a lot with documenting processes, keeping things maintained, being able to have clear communication throughout, because neurodiverse individuals oftentimes recognize that, oh, my brain doesn't seem to be working the same as those around me. Let me be as clear as I can. And that can really help with consistency and processes within an organization. However, the kryptonite is counterintuitive processes, is especially any of you who are supervisors within CU Boulder. If you come up with a process that may be intuitive to you, it's not necessarily intuitive to everyone else on your team, specifically neurodiverse individuals, as their intuitive reactions to processes are going to be a different process than what you've come up with. So the best counter to that is being clear, having direct communications and processes in place. If you want an individual to succeed within your environment, you need to be clear of, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing that, this is the process, instead of assuming that, oh, my brain told me that this is very intuitive and comes naturally, everyone else must automatically know how to do it. And then lastly is the justice mindset. So it is believed that CU Boulder may actually be one of the higher populations of neurodiverse employees within the state, because neurodiverse are oftentimes drawn to nonprofit environments. Neurodiverse love helping to make a difference and wanting to help others and help improve processes within systems. And so they really come to work a lot of times because they're making that difference. They feel like they're helping others. They feel like there's justice. However, if you're in an environment that encourages complacency and doing things by the book and always doing the exact same thing, regardless of outcome, it can be harder for your neurodiverse employees to continue to thrive in that environment.
Keith, did you have your hand raised? Did you want to share anything?
I was gonna add a bit of a point to the superstrengths and kryptonite thing. That I noticed that one of the strengths, or I'm not strengths, kryptonite points was a boring and routine task. But sometimes I found that the boring and routine tasks are kind of my strength in a way, as like once I'm able to keep up like a rhythm to it, I should be good. And I think my kryptonite in regards to that would be if that rhythm is broken, and I need to, whether that be through unclear instructions or doubt in my mind, having that rhythm disruptive stinks.
Yeah. Yes, that resonates with me too, when you're either in like the flow state essentially, or does ADHD, like for me specifically, I know that routines, I need routines, but then I also hit a point where I hate routines because I need the excitement too. So it can definitely change.
It's very
and go back and
confusing.
forth. Yeah, it's very confusing.
Awesome. Eva, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to really agree with Keith there on that. I've learned a lot over the last 6 months working with you guys, but also knowing, I came out of a science background and I would spend hours entering data, but that was kind of like a fun thing. I got my little rhythm going, and it would be a way to also just kind of block things out and just kind of be in that space. When it comes to a lot of things, though, like we talk about interest, that's something that really is important. So I think there's a balance between those two things as well. But thanks for sharing that, Keith.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Christina?
All right, well, just going off of Keith and Eva, I also agree. Sometimes I love spreadsheets. They're like my favorite thing in the world, and I just want to keep entering things in spreadsheets and formatting them until I get to the point where if you show me another spreadsheet, I will literally like die at that moment. So I definitely get the like repetition, but also like the excitement, and how sometimes it's as clear as a black hole. Which is even less clear than mud for those of you who have ever looked into a black hole. Anyway, sorry. In case you can't tell, I am also a little ADHD, but what I have noticed, one of the biggest things, kind of going back to the super strengths and kryptonites, is what group I'm in. If I'm in a group that is willing to let me kind of be me, take the time to process or think the way that I think, and is open to me sharing something that might seem completely ridiculous in the moment, we can actually get a lot more done. And then can be that idea really does have merit and takes hold, and we get a lot more done. But then if I'm in a place where, I start to say something and I can tell that if it's not a idea that the rest of the group has thought of, then they don't even want to hear it. That's when I can kind of shut down. So I find a lot of the strength versus kryptonite is really not necessarily something I can control. And that's something I've had to kind of learn for myself. But that's also something, since I'm very student facing, I'm an advisor. I've tried to just incorporate small things for my students who I know are neurodiverse, or even if I don't. So I'll have fidget toys or candy and stickers and all of these things in my office. Because I found, I had a fidget spinner for myself. And that helped me focus, and I would have students just play with it constantly while we were talking. And so I just started providing those for them, either to use in the meeting or take home. But that was a small thing that I learned to kind of incorporate based on my own experience.
So now that we've talked quite a bit about super strengths and kryptonites, I want to go into the tangible tools and takeaways that anyone who's an individual that identifies as neurodiverse may find helpful, and also those for supervisors that may find helpful. So on your slide right now is a list of recommendations of ways that we think have been helpful for other neurodiverse individuals, including ourselves. And after we go over this list, I want to spend about 5 minutes and think about this as we're talking. What would you like to contribute in ways that you recommend, things that are helpful or hurtful? So, quick thing on this slide is we have examples that are very helpful for neurodiverse individuals are to-dos, tasks, Outlook calendars, lists of things. There is a training at CU Boulder called Getting Things Done that we highly recommend. There's also guides and layouts in workplace etiquette and communication. Oftentimes, neurodiverse individuals don't instinctually have the same etiquette and communication style as others. So we highly recommend looking into different ways and talking to within your organization, with your supervisors, of ways that things are done. As I said in the last slide, things can be very intuitive to some people, but not so intuitive to others. So being able to communicate with supervisors and having supervisors communicate what their expectations are for the different meetings are incredibly helpful. Other helpful things are advance notice for changes, social gatherings, etiquettes, presentations like this, being able to provide an agenda, have a clear timeline, being able to share the slides and different information ahead of time. The more resources you can give and sticking to a schedule, the better. We also highly recommend this thing called body doubling. It doesn't work for everybody, but body doubling helps a lot, especially if you're in person, by having another person in the room with you. And neurodiverse individuals will oftentimes copy the productivity of others. So if one person is in an office working and concentrating and doing things, it can help other people in the office doing the same thing. Whereas if a neurodiverse individual is in the office all by themselves and doesn't have anyone else around, that can be a little more challenging. So I'm going to give a personal example of something I use to help with my autism, and then Eileen will share a personal example, and then we will jump into a discussion. I'd love to hear all your thoughts. So for me, as someone who identifies as autistic, something that I struggle with greatly is reading other people's emotions. Oftentimes, autism demonstrates itself as just not being able to read the body language of other people as well. Oftentimes, body language has to be taught to me to show, like, this is what this means and this is what that means. And it won't come as intuitively to me as an autistic person as it will to a neurotypical. So something that I like to do to help combat that is when I'm having a meeting, I like to have a clear agenda and my hopes of what I'd like to accomplish within that meeting. And when I think that my goals for hitting that meeting have not succeeded in relation to asking someone to do something or asking for teamwork and those kind of things, I will oftentimes follow up with whoever I am having a meeting with, and I will explain to them my struggle in recognizing emotions within the workplace and recognizing emotions within a meeting, and being able to disclose and say, hey, I thought we just had this meeting. I think something was missing here. I'd like to tell you that I sometimes struggle with recognizing if there's tension or any sort of upset. Do you have some time? And let's just talk about, I want to make sure that we're on the same page, that nothing happened that may have been an area of tension. And if so, let's work to communicate it. For me personally, it's very important to have those conversations in private with the individual that you think you may have had a conflict with. In that, it allows them to be more open as opposed to communicating it in front of a large group of people.
For me, body doubling is one of the major things that I do. It also helps for like cleaning up at home and things like that. It can be used in many different settings. And then the other place, I strongly rely on Microsoft's like to-do app. So that has always been really helpful for me for a work-related context. One that I don't think is on, I don't even know if I listed it on the full list at the end. but I have, and I'll put this in the chat, I have a book called The Anti-Planner. It's written, compiled, or created by Danny Donovan. She is TikTok and Instagram person. She's a cartoonist, but then she also created this anti-planner. And the subtitle is How to Get SH*T done when you don't feel like it. And it has a ton of resources, tips, like activities that you can do to get yourself unstuck or help you if you're feeling disorganized or discouraged. I'll put it in the chat. She does have a clean version that you can also look at or order. Spend a couple of minutes of sharing any other tips or tools that you all use. Sonia had in the chat put that she appreciates having clear and direct feedback from supervisors. And similar to Stefani, just making sure that she doesn't miss anything in a meeting. Are there any other things that you have all found helpful that you would want to share? You can either put it in the chat or raise your hand would be most helpful.
We're also open to hearing from anyone who may be a supervisor who can list a struggle that they've had in regards to communicating with someone they think may be neurodiverse, and we are happy to address those as well.
Someone is asking in the chat if you know anywhere to get a diagnosis.
There's lots of different places. If you Google, even if you talk to your PCP, primary care physician, technically a primary care physician can diagnose with like ADHD, autism, things like that. If they know you well enough and if they feel comfortable doing it. When I talked to my PCP about it, she gave me one of the forms that was for kids and was like, yeah, you probably have it. So I did reach out to someone in UC Health Systems to have a formal diagnosis. And that was helpful, but it just kind of depends. So I don't know if we have anywhere that we can specifically recommend.
Kayla, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, so just something that I've found helpful for communication is repeating back to people what I heard. And I just developed this. I was working with scientists a long time ago and found that they gave me a general idea of what they wanted, but I needed very specific things. And so they would say something and then I would say, okay, so you want me to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that was something that really was helpful for me.
So the next slide we're going to get into is very specific about CU Boulder and ADA. If you take one thing away from this presentation, is that if you have any questions, if you are diagnosed or undiagnosed, or if you know that you work with someone who might be struggling with some of these things, reach out to the ADA office. That is the one thing I want you all to take away. They're very helpful. Even if they are unable to get you official accommodations, they will help you with some ideas. They have other trainings for like compliance things. They're great. So definitely reach out to them. There's links and then there's links at the end too. And then a couple of questions specifically about ADA is confidentiality. ADA staff are mandatory reporters, so if there's anything that needs to be reported for those sorts of things, then they do break that confidentiality. However, everything else is confidential. So for example, if you are looking to get official accommodations for ADHD, but you don't want your supervisor to know, they won't tell your supervisor. They will reach out and they will tell the supervisor that you need these specific accommodations. That's it. They won't tell you anyone else why without your express permission. And then the other big one is, do you need to have a medical diagnosis? I would say that in most cases, having a medical diagnosis is the best route to go in order to get official, like documented ADA accommodations. That being said, you can also, there is some kind of a workaround because, as we said, getting an official diagnosis, there's sometimes challenges with that that make that hard. Either it's hard because it's hard to get a diagnosis as an adult because a lot of times people will just, they think of some of these things as more for kids. Like I said, my PCP handed me the worksheet for a kid to fill out. But as I also said, there's lots of comorbidities. So I was not diagnosed with anxiety, but I could have been. It was only that I realized at the same time that I have anxiety, or is it undiagnosed ADHD? And so we decided to tackle the ADHD diagnosis. So I do not have an official anxiety diagnosis in my medical charts. However, if I had an official anxiety diagnosis, you can go to the ADA office and say, hey, here's my anxiety diagnosis. What accommodations can I get for that? Even if you don't have an official diagnosis of ADHD or of autism or something. So those are really helpful. That's a helpful kind of a workaround. And that came from the ADA office. So it's just a little bit helpful. Let's go to the next slide. These are other workplace things. What if I'm worried that my supervisor or colleagues will be unsupportive or dismissive? If you have official ADA accommodations, legally they can't. They have to accommodate those things that are through the ADA office. I would say that the ADA office will also work with you and brainstorm ways to that you can engage with your colleagues, and they will also be able to engage with your colleagues and supervisor. They do have ways of training and resources for coaching supervisors, and of course, there's always the faculty and staff assistance program if you need to talk with somebody. I think we get 6 free sessions as CU employees. Don't quote me on that. And then if you have a supportive supervisor and you don't have an official diagnosis, you can also just reach out to them. I would highly encourage that. Now, that being said, I know that there are not always supportive supervisors. So that's something to be aware of as well. And then I also have all of the links to the different ways that you can address issues that might be happening. So OIEC is for especially the legal, if there's discrimination or harassment, and OIEC and ADA will talk to each other about reports that have been submitted. Arts and Sciences has an incivility reporting form. It does not bypass the OIEC reporting, but so if they receive something that is at an OIEC level, they will loop them in. Sorry, I am saying OIEC without saying the words. Office of Inclusion and Equity Compliance. And even if you submit anonymously to some of these places, it does create a log, and they do speak to each other. The different peoples will speak to each other. So in an ideal world, that would then mean that there would be a log that would potentially show trends or repeated behavior that then could be addressed. So those are that information. Obviously, it's not an ideal world if we even have to have these sorts of reporting systems. So that is understandable. And then finally, this is one of our last slides, a plug for our Alliance for Neurodiversity, which is an affinity group here at CU Boulder. So AND is an affinity group for faculty and staff who identify as neurodivergent and their allies to build a more inclusive university community. We have meetings and events, and it's open to anyone. We have it phrased specifically as people who identify as neurodivergent, because you don't need an official diagnosis to come and join us, and their allies, because it is helpful for people who interact with neurodivergent folks to learn from us and to be able to engage with us as well. In order, there's a SharePoint link. I can get it in the chat eventually. You do need to be logged into your CU identity in order to access any of the affinity group SharePoint sites. So that is a helpful resource. Feel free to sign up and I will email you and get you into our group. And then I just also wanted to say that thanks to the Arts and Sciences Dean's Innovation Fund, we are working on developing a neurodiversity training for supervisors, because that is one pain point that many of us have experienced, is that there are supervisors who are just not sure how to work with their employees who might be neurodiverse, or that's on the negative side of things. And then also on a positive side, just making sure that supervisors are aware of the different ways that they could be supporting or providing resources to their employees. Because like I said, with 15 to 20% of the world population being neurodiverse, we're all working with each other. So, so I think that's it for our slides for this sort of stuff. So I just want to thank everyone for coming, especially A&S for inviting us.